is that relationship, knowing your child and being present and being able to be in tune with some of the changes that are like, is this a natural puberty change? Or are they just kind of not talking to me as much as they used to? Or is something really going on? And then at that point, I would suggest talking to someone or exploring resources.
I never realized that it's usually someone that they know. I sometimes think it's a stranger walking down the street that's going to snatch them, but it doesn't really happen that way. Welcome, Linwood Unified School District families, to another episode of Beyond the Classroom. We're very grateful that you joined us today to talk about a very important and serious topic. We wanted to make sure that we don't end January without addressing a very important topic that we discuss worldwide. And today I have a very important guest speaker today, Joanna Frank, who's our licensed clinical social worker here for Linwood Unified. Before we begin the topic, we do want to bring an important disclaimer that we are going to be talking about very sensitive topics related to child abuse, sexual abuse, and different topics that if there is a child around you, you may not want them around, because this is, again, a very sensitive topic. So before we get into that, I want to introduce Joanna Frank, who's our licensed clinical social worker, as I mentioned. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and explain a little bit of her experience and what she does here in Linwood Unified.
Hello, thank you for having me, Dr. Martinez. I'm happy to be here. As she mentioned, I am a licensed clinical social worker, but so I'm currently located at the elementary school level, but I have experience working kind of across the lifespan with adolescents, high school age, transitional age youth, which is like 18 to 25. They're still young, and then adults as well. But I have prior experience volunteering with the YWCA. It's an organization that we work closely with, and I have experience providing support services to individuals that were victims of trafficking.
Oh, wow.
And so, crisis services.
Yeah. So you have direct experience with this topic.
A little bit, yeah.
And talk about.
Currently, we provide the presentations to parents, to students, and to staff about human trafficking as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I stated earlier, this is a very important topic. So, you know, it's not easy to talk about, but January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So again, we didn't want to end the month with not bringing important information to our families. And even if it's just 20 minutes of important highlights, we want families to hear at least important topics. Let's get started and talk about what it is. Like, what is human trafficking?
So human trafficking is what we would call modern day slavery. When an individual is individuals use force, coercion, or fraud to get another individual into doing an act of labor or a sexual act. So a simple way of kind of framing it is when there's abuse with money, an economic profit, is human trafficking.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And we hear about human trafficking, but we never think it's around us. Yeah. But is it around us?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is around us. It is an issue that impacts us globally. It is an issue that impacts us domestically here in the United States, and then here in Los Angeles as well, and even within our community. It's in our own backyard, basically. But I don't say that to evoke fear that parents and guardians all of a sudden shield their kids from no longer being able to have independence or go out with friends. I say that it's an issue that is present. Long Beach Police Department have a special unit that investigates, and also the sheriffs here have a special unit. And we've done a better job. We're not doing a great job, but we're doing a better job in terms of providing more education and awareness to communities as to what is human trafficking and how it affects our communities. But yes, unfortunately, our community is impacted. And we'll go into myths, I think, but it's not kidnapping per se.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a parent and I'm a little worried now because I hear about human trafficking. We see it in movies, but we never think it'll affect my child.
Yeah.
So as a parent, what are some of the things I should look out for or make sure that I'm aware? That way it doesn't affect my family.
Yeah. And that it's very valid, right? In today's ever-changing technology, who youth interface with today using technology and on the day-to-day, we don't know. We don't always know who they're contacting and who they're in communication with, but it's a valid concern to have. One of the most important things I would say is knowing and having that relationship with your child. And even if it's not a biological child, it's a guardian, having that relationship, knowing them, knowing even though they're an adolescent and they're going to go through these changes in moods, that you know kind of their core personality. So if you see these sudden shifts, that they're isolated, that they're chronically absent, that they are maybe in a relationship that might be indicators of an unhealthy relationship, like in an abusive relationship, that they're being controlled by someone, or that their friends are very easily influenced by friends. Those are some signs. Predators look at and are really honing in on people, very vulnerable populations.
Okay.
Kids are vulnerable population.
Yes.
But the highest vulnerable populations are the kiddos who are unhoused, who don't have a supportive system at home. Like they don't have parents or guardians that are really present, or maybe they're working 3-4 jobs, which is the reality for some, and they're not really involved in their kids' life. Kiddos who identify as LGBTQ are at risk. Foster youth, former foster youth are at risk. And often is the case where maybe the trafficking is not necessarily occurring at the ages 18 and younger, but that person may have already established this relationship, like a grooming relationship with an individual. So just to go back to your question is that relationship, knowing your child and being present and being able to be in tune with some of the changes that are like, is this a natural puberty change, or are they just kind of not talking to me as much as they used to, or is something really going on? And at that point, I would suggest talking to someone or exploring resources.
And that's interesting because in all the other podcasts that we've recorded, that's the same thing everyone says. Like, how do we know when something's going on?
Yeah.
Like, that relationship piece is so important with your child. And it's hard at that age because that's the age where they shut down. Yeah. Like, naturally, right? But us continuing to be there, even though it's a difficult age, it's important for these types of awarenesses. Yeah. So let's talk about grooming, since you brought up grooming. So what is grooming? What does it look like? And again, how should we be involved in that?
So grooming is a process that predators use. So predators who are looking to prey upon children or even adults into building a relationship. So oftentimes, and it's a misconception that somebody who's a trafficker or someone who's exploiting a child in a sexual nature or in a criminal nature is a stranger. No, most often they're not, unfortunately. Yeah, they're someone that maybe the family knows, a relative even sometimes, or a friend of a friend. So we have this image of like who a trafficker could look like or what they look like, a scary masked man perhaps, but that's not the case.
Wow.
So the grooming is that rapport building, that getting to know the youth, that really investing in that person and wanting to know what are their dreams, what are their hopes, like what are their vulnerabilities, who do they have in their life. And so they're wanting to know those things because they can prey upon them. They want to know, oh, you have a dream of owning a BMW? Well, I can help you out. I can get you a BMW.
Wow.
I can make your dreams come true. And that sounds great, especially when you're a young, impressionable person that sees that maybe their family's going through some hardship, or that maybe they want a fast, easy way out. It doesn't make them dumb. It's just that they're younger and vulnerable.
Yeah. Wow. And you know what? You're right, because I work at the school district, and we've been exposed to different things, but I never realized that it's usually someone that they know.
Yeah.
I sometimes think it's a stranger walking down the street that's going to snatch them, but it doesn't really happen that way.
That's a common misconception, that it's a stranger, that it's typically like over 90% of the chances are it's somebody that someone knows. And so it could be someone that they were dating, right? Maybe it's somebody like over the course of the years that they've dated. I was listening to a victim who's sharing about her story, and she was like, yeah, I was dating this person, and I was young, and I was in love, and they said, I can make all your dreams come true. They paid for everything. And they decided to move with that person out of state, and the moment they moved, that's when they were trafficked.
Wow.
And that was that coercion. The police department and people in the field often have this idea that the best victim is the person who doesn't know they're a victim.
Wow.
Yeah. It gives you chills to think about.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
So would you say that some of the grooming, and you did mention it, but a lot of times is, as parents, is if you see someone that's buying them extravagant gifts.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that's common?
That could be. Yeah, it very... so it kind of goes into the love bombing, right? Somebody who's love bombing, who's giving somebody everything, who's maybe in the honeymoon stage. Just because they're receiving gifts doesn't necessarily mean that they're being trafficked, right? But it could mean that if, especially, you're considering, hey, how does a 17-year-old or a 21-year-old afford these items? How are they making that money? Mm-hmm. And those are questions to ask. But tying back to how do you know if somebody's being trafficked or like groomed, it's like if you know your kids and you know who they're spending their time with, if you know the parents of their friends, or you have that trust that they feel, that the youth feels comfortable talking to the parent, like, I'm dating this person and they're amazing. They bring me flowers and they're taking me out and I feel so special, but something feels off. That's a really important key player that a youth can talk to someone about. Yeah.
Red flags.
Absolutely.
Red flags. Next week we have an episode that's going to air on healthy relationships to honor and to promote Dating Violence Awareness Month. So when you originally talked about human trafficking, you did mention that abuse is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could be someone they're dating. Does the abuse normally start when they're being trafficked, or kind of like before? And that would be fear that they would comply. Victims would comply.
Yeah. So it kind of, when there's power and control, it goes hand in hand in human trafficking and in interpersonal relationships. Intimate partner violence, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it goes hand in hand. And so the grooming stage, it's that honeymoon stage, right? But that everything seems perfect.
Okay.
And in reality, nothing is perfect. Like, there's always going to be bumps along the ways. And we're human, we have flaws. But if someone is shielding those sides of them, or there's just something that feels off, those are the red flags. But there are parallels, right, between the domestic violence and human trafficking. But oftentimes the abuse happens later, after all that relationship has already been built. And that person, like in pimp-controlled and in gang-controlled trafficking, that person already feels like, this person saved me, that the trafficker saved me, that they're my family. I love them. So, okay, they hit me because they were mad, or I didn't comply with something, but I still love them. And so that's the confusing part, that someone may not identify as being a victim of trafficking. Just similar to making that connection with someone who's a victim of domestic violence, is that, well, I love them and they hurt me, but I still love them and they love me. They said that they'll get better.
Yeah.
It's cyclical.
Yeah. And you know what's so hard? That when a person gets to a certain age, 16, 17, and they fall in love, and a parent comes and tells them, don't date that person. It's kind of like you're telling them, date that person more, because they kind of want to go the opposite of what you're saying. right? So I guess I'm thinking as a parent, like, how do we, like, if I do see some of those red signs, like, what are some of the things that I can do to help my child? And I know that's a whole other
right.
area, but as we talk about this, I'm thinking about, like, parents probably, see some signs, and it's kind of like, how do I help? How do I help?
Yeah. And when we're young, we make mistakes, and you learn to know who you are and what you want in relationships through those relationships. And sometimes you're like, oh no, this person's not for me. But yeah, there can be those red flags. Going back to that relationship with the parent and the guardians is really identifying early on when somebody has those insecurities, when they don't, when they're looking for that validation from other people, when they don't love themselves enough sometimes. But yes, people, young especially, their first love is intense, right? And we can't control who the kids date today, but we can give them guidance as to what are signs of unhealthy relationships, right? Talking about our own personal experiences in an age-appropriate manner is really helpful. But having those candid conversations with youth is really helpful. And like, oh, Mom, I didn't know you dated someone in high school who presented like with this red flag, or they may have seemed like they had everything, and then it turned out to be a different story. But I also want to clarify that traffickers can be females too. Okay. So they could be recruited by their friends, or it's not always just a male as a person who's trafficking.
So people need to be aware of everyone.
Be aware of everyone, but no, you have we develop an instinct as to who we can trust, right? And that evolves over the course of time. But youth have it. They have this gut feeling, and it's just really helpful when they can talk to a trusted adult and say, like, something feels off about this person.
Yeah. I'm just really hesitant to, it's a really difficult topic, and I know you guys are experienced with, you guys are professionals in the mental health field, and a lot of us, we're not. We're, professionals in different areas. So as a parent, like another question, I guess, how young do predators look? And this is one of the sensitive topics that, with the disclaimer, but how young do predators, look for kids?
Yeah, it could be quite young in terms of like even elementary school age kids. It kind of varies, right? But it can be young in terms of a younger child who's not having those supports in their life. But I will say, like, the data shows that it typically is more adolescent. And it's important to know that the adolescent stage, because any crimes committed to a child is a severe crime, and it comes with punishment. So oftentimes some of that grooming occurs during that time. Nothing criminally is necessarily occurring. And as soon as someone is 18, it's still a vulnerable age, 18 to 24, in that if they're in college or they're away from home, but they don't have these close attachments with people, that they could find themselves in a vulnerable position.
So I guess as a parent, one of the top things to do is talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we can't ignore it. We can't say, I don't want to introduce this to my child because I don't want to scare them.
Yeah. I
want to make them aware.
Yeah. And of course, like, youth are not necessarily always comfortable talking to their parents about these conversations, which is why we also provide the conversation in the classroom. Yes. So we're providing this for 6th graders all the way up to 12th graders, and having those conversations in that classroom environment, but also inviting them, if they have follow-up questions, they can come to us. Or who are the people, the counselors, the LCSWs on staff, and the resources on campuses that they could talk to about, like, oh, I have a question about this.
Good.
And sometimes it's just planting that seed, right? And having the opportunity to talk about these difficult things.
Yeah. So there's workshops available for students, 6th grade and up, and parents.
Yes.
Parents at every school site in the district, and our staff also,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of our kids have, the number one person that they have relationship with is their teachers.
Yeah.
So sometimes, teachers need to be aware and staff of things to look out for.
Yeah.
And then they inform the appropriate person so they can receive support.
Yeah.
So going back to myths, I know you said that, like the example I gave was a myth. What are some other myths, if you have any, on human trafficking?
So just going back to the idea that kidnapping is often a myth. They're not typically kidnapped. Victims are not, they don't identify necessarily as victims. A myth that is typically, it's always men that are traffickers. It can be women. It can be friends of a person. Predominantly women and girls are trafficked, but there are, of course, males and all genders that do get trafficked. So it's important to discuss safety with all youth. There's this idea when we think of human trafficking, we think of like shackles, right? That they're chained, but it's not a physical type of chain. It's more of a psychological chain.
Wow.
If you think of that power and control between traffickers and the person who's could be trafficked for labor, that there is that chain that they make threats to that individual that they would hurt them or they would hurt someone they really care about. Same for victims of sex trafficking as well.
So for a victim of sex trafficking, they could be living at home with their families? Is that how, like they don't get...
They could be. They could be.
So there's all kinds of...
There's all kinds of situations, right? So they could be at home. It could still be like the grooming phase, or that person could be on the side being trafficked to do sexual acts online or also in person as well.
Let's talk about online.
Yeah.
So is that a big platform where human trafficking predators go to find victims?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's an open forum internationally for people to find people, right? And I don't want to create fear for parents thinking like, oh, my kid's on a device like all the time, because oftentimes youth, their method of communication and connection to the world is on their device, right? But we still need to be really, really aware of who are they talking to? What are the platforms that they're on? Now different apps have their chat-based apps. They have somewhat of good security measures that they allow just communication, but they don't allow pictures. So when somebody says, "Hey, let's take this conversation off Fortnite," which is typically for younger kids, or off Instagram, like let me get your number, let's do this elsewhere, that's often a red flag. But yeah, predators are often looking for people online. We provide a lot of information about ourselves online, so someone can see their vulnerabilities. A lot of youth, it's a double-edged sword. They talk about their mental health and they talk about their challenges, which is amazing that they do so. But if they're sharing it with the world, they almost can invite some challenges, like saying, "Oh, my parents are gone this weekend. I'm going to have a party," right? That's an invitation. Or I'm no longer living in my house. I left my house, and I'm seeking resources. So someone could take that opportunity, build that relationship with someone, say, "Hey, I can offer you a job. You need money. Nobody's taking care of you."
Yeah.
So it's really important for parents to know what are the apps, like what are the devices that the kids are using? What are the apps that they're using? Who are their contacts in their life? How to discern if you're talking to a friend on your gaming app or you're talking to a stranger, and what are some problem-solving things that you can do if something feels off?
Yeah. And the sad thing about that is that more and more children that are younger are being given access to the whole platform without supervision. Yeah. And can bring these dangers.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think as parents, as caregivers, you know, I always say this and everyone's going to hate me for saying it, but if you're not at least 16, please don't give them a phone. Yeah. We see so many things here in the district office that these cell phones bring. Yeah. Like, I know there's a lot of positives to it.
Right.
But there's a lot of negative
Yeah.
and dangers.
Yeah.
Dangers.
And it's not just because adults don't like them, right? It has nothing to do with that. It's
Right.
more research is coming out and showing this negative relationship between access to devices and mental health for youth specifically.
Yeah.
They're more anxious, they're more depressed, they're comparing themselves. So yeah, it's actually a recommendation that is coming out more is that really the youngest age that may be recommended is 12 and up.
Wow.
That they have the more cognitive development to process things a little bit more because kids, there are no need for young kids to have a device, especially at school. They're safe. We do everything in our capacity to ensure kids are safe at school. That is our number one priority.
Yeah,
So,
there's phones in the front office. There's phones in every classroom. You know, it's there. You know, we didn't have phones growing up, and we survived. And
it was a blessing, I think.
It was a blessing because we didn't have access to all this other stuff that our kids are going through. Let's talk about some data. Like, do you know some data on? And I know it's hard to get this kind of data.
So the information is widely underreported for human trafficking because the data is typically when crimes have known to be committed or when somebody's captured. So, but approximately about over a million children are trafficked worldwide. In the U.S., one statistic says that every 2 minutes a child is sold into sex trafficking. That's a really difficult one.
Very.
The thing is, with the different types of trafficking, sex trafficking is the most profitable. Human trafficking at large is the most profitable criminal enterprise after drug trafficking. It's why it continues internationally, domestically, and here. When there is events, world's big events, like think of the Olympics, think of the Super Bowl, when we have events that are happening, that is a very big risk factor for when someone can be trafficked because, unfortunately, a supply and demand. There is a demand for it. And so
why during those events?
Because there are people that are coming internationally into one hub, and unfortunately, the sex sells. Yeah, and it's there are eyes on like the Super Bowl. There are eyes. There's more police enforcement, but there's so many things, so many moving parts that happen. Yeah.
Wow.
There are more initiatives that are happening in terms of like in the airports, you'll see more signs that says if you're a victim of human trafficking, here's a number to call. There are hotlines to call. Mm-hmm. So there's more information awareness.
There is. I was in the airport one day and in the restroom there's signs like are you safe?
Yeah.
Like it's similar to that. So I did see that.
Yeah.
And then we as a school district bring information to families. We want to make sure our kids are safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What else would you like to share on human trafficking? Is there something like, I know you present, district-wide, so I'm not sure if there's something on there that you think would be important for our families to know?
There are some, maybe a couple of signs and characteristics that I may not have mentioned is that when somebody is in like a gang or pimp-controlled trafficking, they might be branded. So like an obvious sign is like having a tattoo that is affiliated with a gang. Okay. I haven't talked as much about the different types of trafficking because I was largely talking about sex trafficking.
Yes, yes.
But there is labor trafficking where people are offered positions or job, like this is a job opportunity and you can make money, quick money, and then they're recruited, taken to another location, working, and it's basically like slavery. They're being threatened, they're not being paid or not working under adequate conditions, and that happens globally. Wow. There are trafficking for organs, unfortunately. That is a big trade because the organ donor list is so incredibly high.
Like the black market?
Under the black market, and then people may experience such poverty that they're willing or they're scammed or coerced into being in a position that they sell a part of their organ or like a kidney in exchange for very little, and then it's a life-threatening experience.
Wow.
Yeah. Those things do happen. They're just not, they're common, but the number one, because it's most profitable, is the human trafficking of sex with sex, because it is a profitable one.
Wow.
Yeah.
So here in LA County,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if you have any data on LA County. Have you heard of what communities? Or is it everywhere?
Unfortunately, it's everywhere. So I can say there is an organization that provides data for throughout the United States, and it has kind of like a grade for each state in terms of how they're doing in terms of like providing education awareness, providing resources, and the policies in place. California has a C. It's not failing, but we have a lot of room for improvement.
Wow. Like letter grades, A,
letter
B,
grade,
C,
yeah.
and
A through F.
We have a C in California.
We have a C in California in terms of policy and improvement. So there's room for improvement.
Absolutely.
But here, even in our community, like I mentioned, Long Beach Police Department and then the Sheriff's Office have a whole division that is exclusive to trafficking and human trafficking.
Wow. Yeah. If you had to give parents 3 tips to help with human trafficking in the sense of help keeping their family, their community, whatever safe. Anyone watching, what would they be?
Knowing what human trafficking is, that's having the awareness is number one. It's part of prevention, is having that awareness. Talking about healthy relationships, I would say that's second, right? Like talking about what are red flags, what is respect look like, even owning when someone is modeling maybe not the most healthy relationships at home too. Okay. So that's pretty powerful. And then also having that relationship with their child, that you can talk to me about anything. Or if you don't feel safe talking to me, here you have your aunt, you have your tío, you have your prima, whomever it may be that you know that you can trust, and you can tell them, and we can establish that you can tell them and they're not going to tell me, but they're going to make sure you're safe. Right? Or that these are the resources available at school. Not everybody knows that there's an LCSW at all of our school sites, which is a huge resource that when kids talk to us, we do need parent consent, but that is confidential.
Yes, yes. I'm glad you said that, because again, I mentioned that we do have a couple of healthy relationship podcasts coming up with our partner YWCA and another licensed clinical social worker here from the district, because we want to talk about that and the importance of it, especially if that is the start of grooming. I don't want to bring fear either. Like, I'm not trying to bring fear of saying that it's happening all around us, left and right, but it is happening.
It is happening.
It is happening. And as a parent, we need to be aware in everything that you just said to do. And I want to reiterate everything that Joanna just said about the resources that we have, because that's what this podcast is for. We want to make sure that anyone that's listening, anyone that's paying attention, knows that here as a district, we have different resources. We have licensed clinical social workers available at every school site. We have social emotional learning specialists at every school site. We have our health collaborative that provide mental health services, healthcare services. We have our community school case managers, our community liaisons. There's a lot of resources. So if you are in need of any type of resources, please come to a local school site. Go to our district office. Come here to our district office. Go to our website, mylusd.org, and we'll connect you. Because we want everyone safe. We want everyone healthy. And we want all our families to be successful. So to sum it up, I know our time is ending. Thank you for coming today.
No, thank you for having me.
And I'm not sure if there was anything else that you wanted to share on human trafficking awareness as we end today's podcast.
So just a couple of additional resources. The YWCA is an organization we pair up with, and they provide workshops. I think they even do self-defense classes, which is really cool. And then CAST LA is an organization that they provide therapy and education. And even if parents are not able to participate in our presentations, they can go on their webinar on CAST LA. It's the coalition of Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking.
Good. We'll add that
Okay.
to the end
Yeah.
of the resource
Yeah.
page. So
Sounds
that's
good.
that's perfect. So thank you for joining us. Families, we encourage you to reach out to your school site so you could attend the human trafficking awareness workshops that are happening all our schools at different times. We have one for parents specifically. So please, we encourage you to go. Again, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and we wanted to make sure that we address this important topic. And we hope you join us next week as we launch our podcast on healthy relationships. It's really important as we kick off Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month for the month of February. So thank you again for coming, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a great day.